Creating artificial depth of field is something you could do very easily and very powerfully with the use of a layer mask. Depth of field, for those of you who don't know, is when the camera focuses on a foreground subject, usually with high-end cameras with changeable lenses that can focus on just one subject, and the background simply blends away, calling your attention or the viewer's eye to these three horses, brightly colored. In fact, the green horse is slightly out of focus, where the blue and red and this object behind them is in focus. This is called depth of field. In this shot, this was taken with a lower-end consumer class point-and-shoot camera, and I want to call more attention to the child in front. You could see I did use a photographer's trick of burning the corners here so they're a little bit darker, so it does draw the viewer's eye to the child, but some of the people in the background may be a bit distracting. So let's start with the quick selection tool. And I'm going to use the quick selection tool just how I stated, quickly. I'll quickly drag down over the child and over the chair and possibly over the objects in the front. And I think I'm happy with that. To clean up the selection just a little bit, I'll use the subtract from selection and try to keep his curls in focus, but make sure all the chairs and all the background people are not included. So now, here comes the depth of field. In order to make this fully editable, I'm also going to use a newer feature to Photoshop called a Smart Filter. So I will choose Filter, Convert for Smart Filters. And I'll click OK. It's letting me know that this will be converted to a smart object. A smart object protects the original image inside this layer. And I'll name the layer Child. Now I want to run the Gaussian blur, the filter that will blur all of the background and create artificial depth of field, not on the child, but on the background. Before I do that, though, I never finish a selection without running Refine Edge. And I'm going to use a pretty high radius just to kind of blend away from the child to the background, trying not to get too much of the eye in there. There we go. I'm happy with that. That's why I could be pretty loose about the selection. If anything was messed up, like if I get too much into the hand, I could paint over that, or I could check Smart Radius to keep more of the object itself. And it doesn't hurt to expand the selection a little bit by shifting the edge. Okay. I'm going to click OK on these settings. Now I will select the inverse, or the opposite, to grab the background. And here comes the depth of field. Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. And when I run Gaussian Blur, it brings the center object into focus, but I could click on the door in the background, for example. And then I could see that in the preview area, and the higher you go with radius, the more it's blurring out the passers-by. So now the child is paramount to the shot. And if I click OK, because I made it a smart filter, I can see this eye icon, and I could turn off and on the Gaussian blur. And if there's any other objects that are still distracting, I could click on the Layer Mask thumbnail and use my Paint Brush tool, B for brush, or you can click the brush, and swap my colors so that white is the foreground. White will reveal more, and I could blend away this distracting stroller and these shoes or any other areas. I'm simply painting where I want the Gaussian blur to go. But I want to keep those precious little curls on the child. And it's up to you. I could actually start painting with a lighter opacity. If I lighten the opacity to 35%, I'm only blurring with 35% of the Gaussian blur feature. So when I click and paint, that's 35%. Click and paint again, that's 70%. It starts compounding. And I could even do that for some of the unimportant stuff in this area. It's really your call, but this all helps direct the viewer's eye to the subject of the photo, which of course is the precious child. So here's our end result. If I hide the smart filter before Gaussian blur, show it after Gaussian blur, I've created much more depth of field, and in my opinion, I have a more compelling shot and a more interesting subject because I'm not distracted by all the people in the background. Give this a try with one of your consumer class images or smartphone images. The flaw with those devices is they attempt to focus on everything, which doesn't give the viewer's eye anywhere to rest or draw it anywhere in particular. So this has been creating artificial depth of field with a smart filter through Filter, Convert for Smart Filters, then a selection and a Gaussian blur under Filter, Blur, Gaussian blur. Filters are technically called plugins, so if you ever hear the word plugin, it's something you've run from the filter menu.